Hi, this is David Bernstein, founder of the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values, and this is the SpeechCast. I'm very delighted to have with us today Eran Shayshon from the Reut Group, the CEO of the Reut Group. The Reut Group is a think and do tank based in Israel. I've had the opportunity to work with Eran and Reut for many years, going back to their original 2009 study on delegitimization of Israel that became really the springboard for a great deal of organizing and strategizing in the American Jewish community and really defined the concept for us. Eran, thanks for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
You were just in the United States. I missed you there, but you're back in Israel. That's good. I want to talk to you a little bit about this current ideological moment. You know, there are some who say, well, you're an Israeli, you're an outside group. What do you know about it? But I actually believe that sometimes outsiders bring incredible insight to a problem that those of us who are too close don't always see in its full range of implications. So I really am very interested in hearing your insights. And based on where you sit in Israel and what you've heard, how would you describe this current ideological moment, either for the U.S., maybe more generally in the beginning, and then for the Jewish people and American Jews?
Yes. So first of all, you know, our stakes in this challenge is that we believe that current progressive paradigms are actually challenge Israel's posture in American politics, and also create various challenges to the Jewish communities. And one particular disturbing aspect of these challenges we call erasive discourse, the erasive progressive discourse, which fails to capture and often actively distorts Jewish lived experience and undermine Israel's bipartisan status. It basically confiscates from the Jews the right to self-determine their own affiliation as a collective, their own lived experience, their own narrative, and so forth. And we believe that this is the result of the makeup of the current progressive discourse. In other words, it does not necessarily feed on hate, right? The current progressive discourse is very dichotomic. You either fit to one category or the opposite category. We don't see a middle ground. We don't see places for nuances. And seemingly Jews and the state of Israel lose in several basic conceptual categories. For example, skin color. The prototype of discrimination in the US is based on the history of the African Americans. Hence, Jews are depicted as whites. Second is class-based. Jews are doing very well financially speaking, and as a result, they are being perceived as privileged. Also, I think that many within America forget that American Jewish community has been discriminated against minority during the 60s and 50s and 60s and were an integral part of the civil rights movement. But the strategy or the approach the Jews took that actually positioned them in today's status as affluenced and influenced was going through an incremental approach. Namely, Jews fought in order to be an integral part of the political and social system in America. But today, those who advocate for a more incremental approach are being framed as obstacles to the anti-racist struggle, because today the anti-racist struggle is very total. It's a total approach. Defund the police, for example. Let's ruin everything and build from the beginning. So Jews lose out, and as a result, we see few ramifications. So first and foremost, as I said, the bipartisan support of Israel is undermined. Now, Israel was a progressive case during the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Progressive looked at Israel through the prism of the Kibbutz, this social way of life, social project. Today, progressive look at Israel through the prism of the Kibbush. Kibbush is occupation in Hebrew, from Kibbutz to Kibbush. And clearly, this process is a result of increasing criticism, legitimate criticism over Israeli policy. But the framing of Israel as a white colonialist project is something else. It is a result of this dichotomic progressive discourse, erasive discourse, which frames Israel as such. We also, everything that I've just said kind of detonated during the last war with Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
We saw how progressive tend to interpret it, what they see in progressive terms. For example, they depicted Hamas as if Hamas was an organization of people of color, of brown people, who fight against a white colonialist army. We saw how in the Democratic Party, voices that are calling to revisit the financial and military support for Israel are being mainstream. We see how the crisis between many Jews and Israel is in fact a crisis between Jews and the idea of Israel. That what came out very strongly in the press. So we are very much concerned. We believe that although the progressive discourse was developed in a way which is unrelated to Israel and the Jewish community, as I said, it is not based on hate. It is not based on hate, but it allows hate to flourish.
Right.
It kind of normalizes anti-Semitism and delegitimization, if you like. It lowers the cultural norms that used to protect the Jewish community. And that also creates a huge identity challenge. Many young Jews, many of them are liberals and progressive, feel that they have to choose between them being part of the Jewish community to their liberal values. So many of them opt away from communal framework. Communal framework are delegitimized.
Right. So I've had a strategic change of mind, and it goes something like this. In the previous 5 or so, 6 years, 7 years, since this sort of concept of intersectionality came to the fore, I believe that the Jewish community must accept at face value this ideology. Not that we have to believe it, but we have to accept that it was a reality that we couldn't move, and therefore try to maximize the Jewish position within the intersectional framework, which meant making sure that Jews laid claim to their victim status. They laid claim to their place in the intersectional matrix, and that they made the case as an ally to other communities that were experiencing oppression. They would join with the Black community on criminal justice reform and so forth. But I have to say, especially since George Floyd, and maybe even more so since the Gaza war, I've begun to rethink this. And it goes something like this, that given the fact that this ideology, this binary ideology that we see, is constantly viewing Jews as the oppressor and Israel as the oppressor, it might not work anymore to constantly deal with every act of anti-Semitism, every incident where Israel or Jews are perceived as the aggressor, that you're playing a game of whack-a-mole in a sense here. And instead, it's time that we understand that this ideology is the gift that keeps on giving, and that we better fight the ideology itself rather than just the anti-Semitism that might come as an inevitable result of the ideology. What do you make of that?
So first of all, I see a lot of sense in what you say, but as Reut, as the Reut group, as an Israeli organization, my interest is primarily focused on the Jewish erasure. And what I don't see is a systemic response on behalf of the Jewish community to tackle or to basically challenge this phenomena. We look at the discourse and we look at the actions of Jewish community organizations, and sometimes we feel that they are taking progressive paradigms as is, as a force of nature. Yes. They're not trying to challenge against again, I'm not talking about the nature of the progressive paradigms, because it's not for me to say. I'm an Israeli, I'm not an American, but what I'm bothered is about this particular disturbing aspect of erasure, which undermines Israel's stature within American politics and within liberal and progressive circles, and also create many challenges to the Jewish community.
Yes. So, and you're, based on what you're seeing right now, American Jewish organizations leadership might be sort of trapped in this idea that they've got to constantly operate within this framework, take it for granted, perhaps even promulgate it themselves in a way, because they've sort of bought into the idea that that we live in an oppressive society. And so therefore they have to go along with the discourse. And now it becomes very hard for them to actually deviate from the discourse in any way, including the way it might portray Jews. It may make them reluctant to challenge anything that might emerge from this ideological framework.
So I believe that what is lacking first and foremost is a shared understanding regarding the nature. I don't think that Jewish community organizations choose to remain passive, but it's more the result of a lack of a galvanizing vision and a robust understanding of what we see, which is a threshold to coordinate a loosely organized effort to tackle this challenge. In some extent, the reality that we're facing now really reminds me the way that Jewish communities and the state of Israel treated what later was named as the delegitimization of Israel. The delegitimization of Israel basically started around 2000 or 2001. In 2006, it was starting to penetrate US campuses in America. There were three main explanations, because there was no shared understanding at the time. There were three main explanations to what we saw. There was those who said it's all anti-Semitism. There's nothing that we can do, traditional anti-Semitism in new clothes. There were those who said it's all about policy. If Israel ends the occupation today, then no problem at all. And there was those who said it's all hasbara, public relations in Israel. Literally, it basically says explaining, which tells you something about the Israeli psyche, but that's a different issue. Namely, if we had more people who spoke better English, problem goes away. The problem is that people are not aware of the fact. Now, clearly, in the delegitimization campaign, you have all those three components, but you have a new dynamic that we at Reut, I believe or want to believe, contributed to a shared understanding regarding this dynamic. And we showed that how a relatively small margin peripheral movement, which is composed of dozens of organizations worldwide, dozens but not hundreds, which is on the edges of the margins of local politics, managed to punch above its weight by creating an effective negative branding campaign.
Yes.
And we showed this dynamic, and we created several concepts, which I believed, in a sense, created a galvanizing vision, which allowed de facto all over the world the creation of a pro-Israel network. Clearly, it was not, we contribute our share. It was not a direct result of our work. There were more partners in this world, but just to show you that once you have a rich understanding and a shared understanding of this issue, it is easier to coalesce around this challenge and to create this very much desired, loosely organized effort to counter it. This is the point where we are now at. So I believe that focusing on thought leadership, on explaining what is the unique nuances of this phenomena, is key to creating this galvanizing vision. Clearly, there are more things that needs to be done, but this is the basics.
Yeah. It strikes me, though, as one of the distinctions between, let's say, the BDS challenge, the delegitimization challenge, and the current ideological moment is the nature of the problem itself. BDS and delegitimization of Israel were always going to be a minor force in American politics because it's about Israel. I mean, how much do Americans really devote their mind share to understanding Israel, either positive or negative, right? They may admire it, they may not, they may dislike it, but they're not spending a lot of their energy. Whereas in this case, when you're talking about critical social justice ideology, as I'll call it, it is a major force in people's lives. It would probably sway the election results in this last election and in the election before. It is what is on people's minds. It is the cultural issue du jour that is being discussed constantly on Twitter and everywhere else. And it is capturing key institutions of American life. From government to social service agencies to academia to K through 12 education. So this is very much on the forefront of everyone's minds now, and not a peripheral force. So does this require us to think differently about it than the previous iteration of the challenge, if I'm right? So
first of all, yeah, the focus on Israel, I still believe, is the goal of relatively small number of organizations. That's how society works. The ideologies, the extremes are always on the margins, and the majority will the swabble will always be the majority, the swabble regarding Israel. But the issue is, as you said, that the progressive discourse and paradigm generates this challenge not directly to Israel. It's kind of a residual effect, a byproduct of the makeup of the conflict.
It is.
Which enables these small margin extremists to exploit it and promote anti-Israel agenda, and also, in a sense, anti-Jewish agendas or anti-Semitism, clearly much more evasive and much more subtle than classic anti-Semitism. But again, the problem is the two challenges. One, fighting the extremists, the ideologists, the ideological adversaries. And second is to find the solution or the approach towards what we call the intersectional solidarity supporters. Okay, we make the distinction between the ideological adversaries, which are motivated by anti-Israeli ideological zeal, to those who support them because they believe that the position is the right position for a progressive to take. And clearly, the rest are the swayables who are just buying into this to this discourse.
Right. No, I think that's right. That framework probably applies to everywhere. It's just that we as the American Jewish community and friends of the Jewish people in Israel are no longer just fighting in these very narrow contexts of a university campus or a food co-op. We're now fighting the ideological issue of the day. I mean, there are now, dozens and dozens of groups that have risen up to fight critical race theory in K through 12 schools, for example. You're seeing presidential polling, and partisan polls being taken over, the temperature of American support or opposition to woke politics and the like. So this is part, as you said, it's a residual, it's a byproduct of a much larger base. And I think the question is, so American Jews don't have the ability to dictate that debate. So do we take part of a larger ideological struggle, which is generally right now being fought on the left versus the right, or the right versus the left? Or do we say, okay, we just got to look out for ourselves here the best we can, knowing that we're not going to actually move the needle too much?
I believe that we will be able to move the needle if we articulate the goal in a way which will enable large coalitions and mobilizing a critical mass of organization to challenge this. Clearly, a goal which fits best to this aspect is focusing on the Jewish erasure within the progressive discourse, not fight the progressive paradigm as a whole. Again, as an Israeli, I feel that my position to actually tackle this question is limited. I'm an Israeli living here. That this is your issue, but we are energized or mobilized by the side effects of this phenomena to the stature of Israel and to the Jewish community.
Sure.
But then again, we also have to remember another very painful issue. The Jewish community today is fragmented. The ability to mobilize large Jewish coalition is compromised. I do believe, however, that around the Jewish erasure within the progressive discourse, we can mobilize, I'm using this concept again, a critical mass of organization that would challenge this issue and in a loosely coordinated effort. I believe that this is possible, and I believe that so far the Jewish erasure was not facing a systemic offense against it, and therefore, if the Jewish community wants that up to the challenge, there's no reason why that would change.
So let's talk about a coalition. If our previous target audience in delegitimization was sort of the fence sitters on delegitimization, and so therefore we were, working with a center-left coalition to try to, reach the fence sitters. It seems to me now we're trying to mobilize a different coalition, maybe of centrist groups, center-left to center-right groups. It's a different coalition because we're fighting a different battle now. Is that your take, or do you think it really is the same coalition as before?
So I think it's always a different coalition. It really depends on the issue. The issues are very dynamic, and I'll tell you the following: there is a paradox that we have to embrace. The further one is progressive, the further one is critical of Israeli government policies, the more his voice is potentially effective in affecting the progressive discourse if you will take a very clear position against the Jewish erasure. So we need to have diverse coalitions. The further they are to the left, the better it is. Clearly, it is hard. It is a much harder task. But the expectation from those progressive allies, if you want, is to delineate red lines in their actions and deeds with other progressive elements, because many times, unwittingly, they may fuel this anti-Israeli sentiment.
Right. See, I guess, and I understand where you're coming from. There's only so much you can say and do, and you're trying to isolate the variable of erasive anti-Semitism. And maybe it's that when I look at that and I say, okay, that's the byproduct, and the byproduct will be a continual byproduct. I don't know that I believe any longer that we can just challenge the byproduct without challenging the ideology itself. So maybe where we sort of differ in a way here. I'm not sure that that's a doable proposition anymore. I just feel like the ideology is so potent, so widespread. And here's really the key point. It's so deferred to. In other words, it has a hold on the psyche of many institutions because people don't feel that they have the moral authority to fight it. And so I worry that that's going to continually produce different variants of the same thing. And whether you'll call it erasive anti-Semitism or just the binary itself, as long as that sort of holds sway within that ideological framework, I don't know that there's a way around it. And that's why I'm sort of moving in a different direction, I think, than maybe how we would have fought it 5 years ago.
In a way, it sounds very complicated, almost an impossible mission. But I think we actually have, on paper, a very simple task which is based on the reality. The fact is that there's a mismatch between the current, it's a fact, between the conceptual progressive framework and conceptual frameworks and the Jewish lived experience. We are something else. And what we need to carve is a space within the progressive discourse, a space that acknowledges that the Jewish story is too nuances to be placed in either this category or the other category. Most of us may be white and doing well financially. Some of us, not all of us. I'm not, but some of us. That's on the one hand. But we are not a disempowered population. We do not compete on the extent of victimhood. We shouldn't compete on the extent of victimhood with the Black Americans. There should be a unique place for us in the progressive discourse. And because this position, I believe, is anchored in reality, I believe it's also achievable. So articulating the goal in a way that makes sense and also ambitious yet achievable is something which is keynote in mobilizing.
Right. The criticism is going to be that by doing that, you're actually stipulating to the ideological discourse itself, and we're remaining trapped in an ideology that is going to continually bring about and fuel anti-Semitism. But it's a tough call. I get it, and it may be that we need some kind of diversification, strategic diversification here, where there are people who fight within the framework and there are people who fight outside the framework. And I guess what I've been, and I believe that, by the way, I believe that we need some of that. The only problem is, the question is, what does the community sort of devote the lion's share, the majority of its strategic bandwidth to? Does it devote the lion's share to try to work within the framework or outside the framework? I think today most of the Jewish organizations are fighting within the framework. I think it's failing, as I've said, and I think that's what's got to shift, is the amount we devote to sort of the outside game to the inside game. I don't mean to call it a game, it's very serious business, but I think we've devoted too much to sort of taking it on in the inside when it's not doable, or it's not doable alone. Maybe the two combined would be more effective. But this is going to be around for a while. I mean, I just don't know how we escape it. And I do worry a lot about how this plays out in the U.S.-Israel relationship. Do you have a sense in Israel how Israeli government officials, foreign ministry, and others are looking at this challenge now? Do they understand the new ideological parameters of the discussion in the U.S.?
So trying to be apolitical as I can. I think that the new government brings with it a different approach. I suspect that the last government saw the erosion of the bipartisan support for Israel with a mixture of either indifference or lack of understanding.
Right.
At least if I judge the statements of current of officials in Israel, in the new government, I believe that they understand that there's an issue here, that the erosion of the bipartisan support for Israel is in fact an issue of national security.
Right.
And therefore, trying to re-engage with the Democratic Party should be a top priority to the government, and I see that coming. There may be a need to articulate better a new vision and a strategy, because we know that there are many layers to this issue, but they believe that the ground, should be right. By the way, it may be easier to do with a centrist government, which is very diverse ideologically, like we have today in Israel. If you look at the Israeli political system, I'm not a prophet, and trying to make assessment in the Israeli politics is not very recommended. But if I look at the Israeli politics, you see that 76 members of the Knesset are identified today with the right-wing agenda, out of 120, right? Mm-hmm. The reason why we don't have a right-wing government, but a centrist government, is anchored in very particular and unique reasons. But the future to come, if I look at next 20 years, we are very likely to have right-wing governments in the future. So now we may have a window of opportunity to try to reshape or to create a new paradigm in the relationship between Israel and the US, because later down the road it will be more difficult. And I also think that in a way, the war with Gaza may be remembered as a wake-up call for the state of Israel and Jewish communities. I see a lot of similarities between what the Gaza flotilla was to the ability and willingness of the Jewish community to fight delegitimization, to what the recent war with Gaza may be to the progressive discourse. It was then a huge wake-up call. And based on my trip to the US last week, I spoke with so many frustrated people that I felt understood that we are now at an inflection point. So this is the right time maybe to try to mobilize them and to try to seize this opportunity that there's more willingness and ripeness to end.
Yes. You were just in the US for a few days. Did you come away with a sense of what the zeitgeist was like right now around in the American Jewish community around Israel, and what happened, how people are feeling?
So clearly, in every we live in the Middle East, so we do suffer from this. Let's call them mildly those military clashes every now and then. It is not until I got to the US that I understood how different this military clash was in terms of the effect that it had on American Jewry and maybe the zeitgeist around Israel. And for me as an Israeli, it really surprised me. The recent clash or war with Gaza was relatively short, compared to previous rounds, with far less casualties, with far less civilian casualties. Of course, that every casualty is a huge loss and shouldn't happen. But if
compared to 2014,
but if you look at the numbers, we are in a different place. It started when Hamas, clearly it started with issues in Jerusalem, but the fighting started when Hamas targeted civilian population firing rockets. So seemingly we had, all the pieces in place, and yet the effects seem to have been far more shocking than I've anticipated. And I was very, very much concerned. And, following the media, the Jewish media in the US, it seems to me that the gap now is not just between many Jews and Israel, but between many Jews and the idea of Israel. And then Israeli, as someone who believes in the Jewish people, I'm very much concerned.
Where did you see those fault lines in the American Jewish community between what populations? Is it between younger Jews and older Jews? Is it ideologically between sort of across the ideological aisle? Where did you see it?
So my trip was not about, meeting all sorts of, population and constituencies in the U.S. They were very much focused on several specific individual. So I'm not sure, so what I'm going to say based on the impression on what I heard. I believe that clearly there's a bigger gap between Israel and young American Jews. And this is a gap that started far, much before the recent war.
Sure.
And clearly it escalates now. I think that many young Jews, as I said, feel that they have to choose between, again, their loyalty to liberal values and being part of the Jewish community. By the way, not only because many Jewish communal organizations are supporting Israel, but also because increasingly, going back to the progressive discourse, Jewish community organizations are being perceived as complicit with the current power structure. So again, I think that the fact that Israel is at the front line is more a byproduct of the discourse. It does not necessarily based on hate, but it results in bias and discrimination. That's in a nutshell.
Yeah. So how is Reut, what role does Reut see itself playing moving forward in trying to build this new understanding within the Jewish world?
So I would say that our traditional approach is that because we're coming from Israel, and despite this, what I want to believe is a robust conversation, we may lack the cultural and political sensitivity. So we never put ourselves in the forefront or in the trenches. It should be the task of Jewish American organization to lead this fight. What we are trying to do is to contribute to a clearer and more accurate articulation and definition of the challenge. We may be engaged in activities to convene and mobilize critical mass of organizations and leadership, but it will be only based on strong partnerships with local organizations who would lead the fight. Namely, it won't be a collaboration based on equal partnership. It won't, but we know our place. We may contribute to a strong social media presence. And David, as you know, we've been very much engaged and invested in the revival and strengthening of the community relations field, because we believe that at the end of the day, our relationship-based approach is the most potent response of the Jewish community to the current challenges the Jewish community is facing, clearly emanating from the progressive discourse. Engaging with disempowered population, with other minorities, working on community cohesion is something that Jewish community relations organizations are doing. This is their bread and butter. So bolstering the community relations field is the order of the day.
Agreed. And I think it's going, and the question is going to also come up, how must that work change? And maybe we're going to have maybe we'll do a second discussion on that not too distant future. I'm working on something myself with some strategic recommendations, and I'd love to think them through with you. So very much appreciate that. Listen, this has been very important discussion. I know it's going to be a continuing discussion between us two and between the Reut and the American Jewish Community Organizations. We're going to be in for a challenge of our life. And I'm thankful that we have such insightful and strategically minded partners in Reut Group in Israel. So thanks a million.
And thank you very much, David, also for the opportunity to share these ideas. Thank you.